All right, everyone, we're going to talk about what's known as a mask. And a mask has to do with hiding or temporarily not showing a particular area. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to show this in terms of Adobe Photoshop. You guys might have done this if you've ever done Adobe Photoshop. There's something called masks. It exists in other graphic design programs like Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Animate. So for instance, I have a layer here. Now I could use this is an eraser tool, and I could erase part of this. But instead, I might apply something called a mask. And what a mask allows you to do is to mask out or hide part of your image, but to not make that permanent. Okay. So I'm in Adobe Photoshop, but you can still do this in Photopea. But you can see here, this is my mask. The white is the part that's visible, the black is invisible. But what's nice about this is that it's not permanent. I can always go back and I can either change it, or I can even disable this mask, or other things like that. Now this is what we call a raster mask, but actually if you know anything about Photoshop, you actually can also apply you can also apply a vector mask as well, which would allow you to use some sort of vector-based situation like a pen tool. Oops, except I gotta. There you go. I used the vector tool here to, mask part of this image, right? Now we could do something simple. If you haven't done this, don't worry about it. But I'm just trying to show how it relates to other graphic design tools that perhaps you've used. I'm going to go to After Effects here, and we are going to open up exercise 8, which I think I already did. And I got this background image, and I got this video of this cute little parrot. And what I'm going to do is create a mask. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the video, or highlight the what's the word? Highlight the layer that you want to apply the mask to. And we are going to go over here. Now, this is a vector tool. It's used to make vector shapes directly into Adobe After Effects. We're not going to talk about making vector shapes today. We'll probably go over that another time. But when you make a mask in Adobe After Effects, it is vector-based, which is why we're using this. So if I click and hold, you can see I'm getting a rectangle, ellipse, polygon, star. I'm just going to use the rectangle tool here. And when I put this over the video, you can see I'm getting this background with like the white box with the black circle. You might notice how that looks very, very similar to the masking tool that you might see in Adobe Photoshop or Illustrator. And that's because if I click and drag, I am masking this video. So in other words, everything outside of the shape, the rectangle that I just made, is being hidden. And what was inside of the rectangle is being kept, or is being shown. Okay. Now, if you want to take a look at your mask, when you have a video, you can either unfurl it and you can see mask. And this is called mask one in this case. Or if you highlight the layer and hit the M key, this opens it up. And I just want to kind of show the different things you can do. Now, once you make a mask, first thing is if you want to delete it, just highlight the mask, the name of the mask, and hit the delete key as such. Um, you can always edit the masks by basically using the little squares at the end. So if I click on this, you can see I can readjust this mask as such. Okay. We would call this the mask shape in this case, or the mask path. Other things you can do include you can do what's called feathering. Feathering means that, so right now, the edges of my mask are very crisp, they're just like these very hot knife through butter kind of situations. But what I could do is if you feather it, that means you're going to get a feathered edge. And you can see now that my edges are a little bit more blurred. You can play around with opacity, which means the content literally inside of the mask. And also we have expansion. Expansion means that you are allowed to go outside or inside of the mask. And all of these are editable. So for instance, I could or animate the masking, or sorry, the feathering is what I meant to say, to make it more or less masking. So you can see it started off crisp and then got more and more feathered. You could even change the shape of it over time, aka the mask path. So right now it is a square. I'm going to go on to 2 seconds and then I'm going to double click. And we are going to do something like this. So in other words, I'm increasing the size of my mask. And you can see that my mask is expanding over time. Okay. So these are some interesting things you can do. Uh, Let me talk about some other things you can do with masks. Once again, I have this video here in a background. Um, let's use a different shape. I'm going to use the circle. Oops, make sure. Okay. Actually, let's just use the regular. I could use the circle, but I'm not going to. But um, so I have this mask. In this case, it's called mask one. By the way, if you ever want to rename it, you can just double click. Over here under mode, this is where you can choose different types of masks. And it's a little hard to see at the moment. Don't know if I can make this much bigger, but anywho, right now, these are the ways that the mask can apply to your video. So if I set none, that basically means the mask does not apply. So it still exists, it's just not applying to my video. If I say add, that means it will what the shape that I drew, whatever shape that was, whatever is the part where the video is kept and everything else is subtracted. Okay. If you were to do subtract, that is actually the opposite. So in subtract, what this means is that whatever shape you make, that is the part that's actually subtracted and everything else is kept. So you can see here that the shape is actually being used to cut through this layer, and then we can see the layer underneath it. You can actually make more than one mask. So here I'm going to set this back to add, which means the shapes that I make um, affect, what's being visible. I'm going to choose another vector. Let's choose circle. Okay. And I'm going to click on this and I'm going to click and drag and see how it made a second mask called mask 2. Mask 2 is also set to add, so it's also adding to the general shape, as you can see. But I could actually play around with this, so maybe this is subtracting. So it's actually cutting away from this mask because they overlap each other. Okay. You could even do something interesting things where you do intersect. If I set both of these to intersect, it only keeps the part where the two vector shapes overlap one another. So you can see here, this is where the circle and the square overlap each other. And so an intersect, that is the part that's being kept. But, you could play around with this and do some interesting things. It partly depends on whether things are being added or subtracted, but I can end up with some interesting kind of shapes here. Okay. Another thing you can do, this is specifically if you have Adobe Illustrator. Unfortunately, I've tried this with other vector programs and it doesn't work. But if you go to Adobe Illustrator and you open up a vector path, like we talked about back when we talked about vectors, this is a vector graphic, this boat. And what I'm going to do is highlight it, and I'm going to go to Edit Copy. And what you can actually do, once again, unfortunately, as far as I'm aware, this only works if you're copying and pasting from Adobe Illustrator. So unfortunately, if you're using Figma or some other vector program, I don't think this works. I tried to get this to work and I couldn't get it to work, but I'm going to highlight, and what I'm actually going to do is vector paste. And you'll actually see that when you do that, it copies and pastes the graphic into here. And so I made this nice complex vector, this complex mask. Oops. And now I can actually increase it. Or I'm going to click and drag or click to, increase it. All right, the last thing I kind of want to show is that you can actually animate masks. So I got this footage here. What I'm going to do is let's click and drag to form this mask. Here's my mask one. And I showed this before, but let's do a little more formally. Remember that the mask is kind of like the window into the video. You can only see the video wherever the mask is. So what I'm going to do is go under mask path and set a keyframe. And then I'm going to, so I changed, this is the shape or the path. And what I'm going to do is extend this outward as such. And I make a nice little animated mask, which is very good if you want to reveal stuff, So like I'm revealing this parrot here, which is kind of nice. Another example of this would be I'm going to take this footage of the kayak and I'm just going to make, I set this to the star tool. This makes it like a little star like that. And once again, let's set that to a mask path. Set the keyframe for that. And then I'm going to go here and then let's increase this. I'm not going to change the shape, but I am going to change the size. So I just basically, if you're wondering how I did this, I basically clicked on the edges here to get this white such, white box, and I'm going to do this. And the result of that is the mask shape is increasing. In other words, it is reveal, it's growing and getting kind of a fun little star effect. To be honest, it'd probably be better if it was faster. Maybe something more like this. Whee, star wipe. Okay. So, this is how you can use masks to create some visual interest. You might use it for compositing, where maybe you set up your video where you cut certain parts out so that you can reveal something underneath it. Or you can use it for sort of visual effects like this, where maybe like I want to have this interesting, kind of shape of, rather than having kind of a rectangle, having this kind of unique shape that kind of animates or is, something a little bit more visually interesting. Okay. Why don't you try that out? That was 8, 9, 10, and 11, please.